Life. A constant ebb and flow of good and bad experiences. We spend hours scrolling, watching perfect highlight reels of people's lives. I've been a storyteller for 9 years. I have yet to meet a person who hasn't had a dark shadow cast over their soul from staring death or trauma in the face, myself included. In sharing my experiences, I've gained tools for days when those shadows get a little too dark. I'm Paulina Bootska, and this is not your typical mental health podcast. We all have a story. It's time to start using yours for your revival.
I said that confusingly.
I said clarify this.
Sorry.
I would go into any battle alongside Vanessa.
And 150 more.
She has said these words to me before, but I'm not sure I've ever said them out loud to her.
You were also my weekend producer for television
I
news.
sure was. And that's what made me quit, just so everyone's clear. Just kidding. Just kidding.
When we work as a team, we are unstoppable.
I think we solved some problems
Let's go.
today.
We have cried and butted heads during and after newscasts. We have challenged each other on our decisions and our approaches, all while questioning our sanity weekly.
To be clear, you quit after I got fired.
I did. I just missed our weekend therapy sessions so much. I just had to quit.
Us creative type A's, we like to have things figured out. News challenges that very existence. Newsrooms are shutting down, layoffs are happening in droves, and our industry has a tendency to overpromise and underdeliver on basic resources like staff, equipment, and safety. It takes courage and a little faith to step into a new chapter with the words still unwritten. When conversations with family and friends seemed futile, I turned to God. Me and the big guy have kept our status at it's complicated.
We go to church together on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't willingly stepped into a church in 6 years. I prayed to be fired. And 3 days later, my prayers came true.
Come join us. One of us. One of us.
Some call it a setback. I call it a blessing. Leaving let me step into who I am authentically. I got pushed out. Vanessa chose to leave. But in faith, we've both been able to tackle some mighty mountains. This isn't a Christian podcast, but we do talk about God and how our faith has helped us in the hardest of times.
Oh, man. This is going to be a long episode for everyone. Just want everyone to buckle down.
And not sorry.
Buckle up with Bootska.
Please help me welcome my former producer, Vanessa Villanueva.
Buckle down with Bootska.
Yes, there you go. Buckle down.
There was a whole series of this in Louisiana. You can look it up, guys. It's on YouTube.
Oh, I need to look that up.
You can
Me
do.
too.
But where we are both in life right now is that I kind of had to rebuild really quickly, figure out what's next. And I think that I had laid a foundation down a good year ago before all this happened, so that when this came down the pipe, I was like, oh, okay, now it's time to work, you know? But you have a little bit of a different, I don't know, you kind of leaned into faith and said, I'm going to walk. I don't know what I'm walking into.
You know, one of my close friends just described it best. I ran into her at a coffee shop and she had a friend with her. And this was after what I'm calling early retirement. And she saw me for the first time. It's probably been months. And she was explaining to her friend what was going on in my life. And I thought it was hilarious because she said, you know, Vanessa takes a lot of risks. She likes to jump out of the plane first and then pull the parachute. And so in our situation, it's like you got pushed out of the plane. Mm-hmm. I voluntarily jumped, but yet both of us are just trusting that this parachute is going to glide us down. That parachute being the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. But no, I think that it's really interesting when I make these transitions. I wish I could tell you this is like the first time that I've ever done something like this, but unfortunately it's not. I like to just pivot. This is the first time that I have quit a job without a new job, and really felt that it wasn't my own doing, that it was really the Lord telling me like, hey, I need you to make this transition and I need you to step into a different, what I call a calling. And I know that means different things for different people, depending on where you are in your, not just religion, but just place in life. For me, a calling is something I specifically feel like the Lord has told me, like, hey, I need you to do this thing. I know that sounds kind of bizarre to people who especially aren't religious. They're like, what? But it literally feels like a call. Like imagine a close friend or family member or mom, dad calling you and saying, hey, I need your help with this, or can you come to the house? That's what it feels like, where it's like, I got to go do this thing. Not because like I'll be punished if I don't, but just that you want to. And so I felt that calling on my heart to step into the world of incarceration and prison reform. And so that is very left field. I have no background in that. I have no training in that. So I was like, well, okay, Lord. Well, yeah, it's 2024 and you can't just like walk into buildings and say, hi, I would like to work here.
Except you did.
But I did. I very much did, because that's what he told me to do. He said, no, I want you to go down to the Clark County Detention Center and walk in and just tell him that you're there to help. And I was like, okay. Paulina, I literally know nothing about the Clark County Detention. I didn't even know where it was. And I've lived here my whole life. I was like in GPS, like take me to jail. I don't know. And so I took my little innocent behind to the Clark County Detention Center. That was an experience. Did you ever go there like to cover news stories? She's like, yeah. Same now. And it is an experience and I was not prepared, but it wasn't that dramatic. And I wish I had that like story to share with people. Like, and I walked in and then like this woman was like, oh my gosh, we've been waiting for you. And she gave me a badge. But that's not how this story ends. And I think that's important because although I followed through on what I felt the Lord telling me to do, it didn't end the way I thought it was going to end. I went, I told them, hey, I'm here, to work. They kind of gave me a little look like, okay, go online like a normal 2024 person. And through that, I did find a job posting that kind of correlated with what I felt the Lord called me to do. I didn't get that job, but it still is I still conclude it as part of the story because it's just the obedience to the calling that I think is the takeaway and the important part. That's what kind of launched me into this, like, okay, you know what, we're going to do this. We're going to quit our job. We're going to go all in. We're going to continue to walk this path down into incarceration and prison reform and trust that there's something for us down the line. And so I'm still looking, searching, putting things out there. The story is still unfolding and it's still extremely nerve-wracking, but also very reviving. So I'm kind of in a transition, as you said.
When you were speaking, you said you have no jailhouse experience. Yeah. I would say that if you can wrangle a weekend crew with no resources in a TV news station and no one running the ship, I think you can handle a jail cell.
Not you comparing people in the newsroom to inmates. You know what's funny? You know what's interesting is as I look at these job listings, postings. Now, let me be clear. I'm not trying to just be a crazy person. And like a lot of people I've talked to about this have told me, you should be a corrections officer. And I'm like, well, let's be realistic here. Like, and so it's very much leaning into the skills and qualities and talents and traits that I possess as a person. And then what my gifts, I believe, are that the Lord's given me. Right. And so, when I look at these job listings, though, the qualifications are exactly that. They're very similar to like I don't want to say like a regular job as if it's not a regular job to work in prison reform, but I just was very shocked. I guess I thought you had to have these special like accreditations and qualifications and you just exactly what you experience, that you're willing to be open to learning how to apply it in this particular environment versus your previous environment. So yeah, I think you're kind of spot on, because I definitely, when I explain what I used to do in news to like just general people, if you're someone listening, you're like, what is it like in a newsroom? Let me just tell you, if you ever planned a party, I always tell people it's like you're planning a party, and then the day of the party, you have this whole plan. And then just my producer experience. You're like, oh, we're going to get the balloons at this time. And then we're going to pick up the cake. And then we're going to do this. No, the cake's not ready. The balloons are the wrong color. The party, like everything just goes awry. That was my life. So I've learned how to problem solve and pivot and wrangle for sure.
In seconds.
Yes, in literal seconds. Yes. And that we went on that ride together.
When we both started, we're both type A personalities, and that works very well for something that's unorganized, because then we can organize and kind of like, get things done and produce a newscast, but it doesn't always
It's not always very good for like personality wise. So when we started, we'd butt heads a lot.
Yes.
After 6 months of really both of us praying about each other, I was like, I've been praying about this.
Yeah.
And you're like, I've been praying about this too.
Yeah. So I have had a track record in whether work relationships or personal relationships of I just avoid anything hard, like truly, or I should say I used to. Probably a little bit of my flight syndrome from being a military brat child. You didn't have to get connected to people. In my head, I was, as a kid, I'd be like, I mean, this person's gonna be gone in a couple months, so what does it matter? So I didn't learn how to like resolve emotional conflict very well. I also don't have very emotionally intelligent and aware parents. Love them to death, but they didn't teach us how to regulate our emotions. So as an adult now in spaces, when I run into someone who we'll just say is a little more spicy, that's what Pauline is. She's a little more spicy.
Definitely spicy.
It's a challenge, and I usually just quit. I just walk away from that friendship, that dynamic, that relationship. Even in a workspace, usually you have a larger pool of coworkers that you can kind of just avoid that person. Well, no, the Lord said, figure it out, Vanessa, because you can't keep doing things that way. And our weekend team was at what, like 5 to 10 of us, maybe on a good day. So very small.
Very small.
So it didn't, and of course, like the dynamic from a producer to an anchor is like your team. You're a right and a left hand. Like you have to communicate. That really forced me, as much as I wanted to put blame on you, because that's the easy thing, to be like, well, she's just difficult, which, to be honest, you were not difficult. It would have been.
I'm direct. I'm
Yes.
direct. I mean well. I wanted to sit down at the table and be like, let's have a conversation.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think this is an important thing for people to understand, especially like you said, people with stronger personalities, type A personalities. We tend to walk in a room and say, you're welcome. Like we feel like we can run the team, we can start the project, and I have had to humble myself many times, not just with you, but with many different teams, people, friends, and say, Vanessa, you don't know everything. Like, let's let this person have their moment, hear them out, and hopefully that's respected, and hopefully that conversation becomes more productive for both parties. Like, you get heard, I get heard, we, dance off into the sunset with a better plan, which in the end is what ended up happening when you and I finally sat down. We produced and created and fronted some of what I believe is some of the best content to ever come out of our news station. Absolutely. Once the enemy got out of the middle and we both sat down and we're like, all right, listen, what's the deal?
And we were kind of forced into that situation. We were forced into it because we had a weekend where we really had to rely on each other. It was having to trust that both I had the best intention in mind for the newscast and that you can take what I'm giving you and like create it. And I think it was like one breaking news day after like another. So it really was a lot of teamwork that had to happen and a lot of communication, where up until that point, I feel like if I was like, hey, Vanessa, we need to do this. In news, we speak like that, right? Like we're very direct because things need to happen in seconds. I don't have time there to hold your hand and be like, are you going to be okay doing this? Like we have 3 seconds to make a decision right now because that either goes on air or it doesn't. If it fails, it fails. We try, make a decision and keep moving and go with it. It's kind of teaching people also that in that moment, we can't panic. We can talk about it later. I think that that's where we sometimes get stuck. And I think that's where me and you clashed a lot.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I am someone who, although I'm very opinionated and I'm a good problem solver and I can take the lead of a lot of things. I do appreciate a good structure and a good layout. I am a military child. So you give me a layout and say, hey, step 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's where I thrive. And it's nothing against this particular team or this station, but I wasn't given a structure. I was just thrown into just figure it out. And so that was already like an internal stressor for myself that I was trying to deal with. And then having someone as experienced, I'll say, as you coming in and saying, well, we should try this. My brain was just in okay, I like that idea, but is that right? And I think that's kind of to tie all this together. What I'm learning in this season is there is no right or wrong in the general sense of like making decisions. It's more of what I believe is trusting the instincts of what the Lord has put in front of me. Take, for instance, you just told me something this last weekend when we were together. In the past, when someone, whether they're close to me or an acquaintance or whoever, has brought up a potential like, hey, I think, you'd be good at this, or you should consider this thing for your life. I am 1000% like, nope, no, thank you, goodbye. And I just walk away from it, which was kind of my natural fleshly instinct to what you had suggested. I was like, yeah, okay, that's great, but no.
And you said that exact thing.
Yeah. Also, I have no AC in my car, so I was also just hot and bothered. So let's just give that a second. But no, but usually,
Queen of bad timing.
hey, you know what? We're all about being honest here, right? And so like in the moment, what felt comfortable was going, no, I don't like this. This is change. This is different. This is challenging. I don't want to go there. Like, let me just stick to what I know. And then after the fact, and like you had sent me this really wonderful text message, and I, in both parts, I think there's a takeaway here. As the person, friend, coworker, whoever, family member who feels like you have something to say to maybe a type A type person, I appreciate that you continue to explain like, here, this is where my heart's at, and this is what I'm trying to say. And then on my end, it was, okay, Lord, I don't care if I'm right or wrong. I care that you are the one that is right or wrong. So I think what I said to you was like, thank you for sharing this, and I'll pray on it, because that's what I meant. Like, I'm going to take this to the Lord, which is why when people ask me like, well, I don't understand like why you're so like, why are you always talking about God? Why is God always a factor? And I'm like, because it takes the pressure off of yourself. Like, I'm just like, you know what, Lord, whatever, it's on you. Like, imagine having a person who just makes all your decisions for you, in the sense of, not that it's not hard. I don't want to like fluff it. Like, I just live this fluffy life. I mean, hello, I'm sitting here early retired. Like, no, it's not easy. But I think that it takes the pressure off of yourself of like, oh gosh, am I wrong? Oh gosh, is Paulina wrong? Like, it's not about you leading me. It's about you speaking what you felt the Lord telling you to say. And now I take it to the Lord and go, okay, Lord, is this accurate? And he corrects me. So that's the big lesson I've learned, like in this last, I guess, almost 2 years that I've known you, where previously I would have just been like, nah, like, no, just unsubscribe.
Unsubscribe.
I'm not interested in this conversation. Goodbye.
And I do that a lot too, right? Or at least I used to. And what I take away right now, even in moments of like strife or conversations that I walk away from, or even people that I walk away from, I take a lesson. And we've had a lot of moments together recently where I've really leaned into our friendship and I've leaned into my faith. I thank you for that, because I feel like you brought me back into like a community that I needed, or I didn't even realize I needed. Our friendship is really what takes me back to kind of these conversations back to God. And I find that every time me and you would, like I say, our therapy sessions on the weekends, I'd sit there and I'd leave and I'm like, God, even if it was something that like sat and like rattled me for a moment, and I'd sit there and I'm like, all right, what are you trying to say? Or is it triggering me? Is it something that I need to work through? Is it something that I need to listen to? Is it something that I need to lean into? Or is it a perspective I need to change? And so I've been challenging myself on different perspectives and different things that are happening in my life, on not playing victim to them, but saying, what is happening in here so that it could benefit me somehow? Like, what are you trying to work through?
Yes. Because ultimately, everything has its reason and its season, right? People go through some real life stuff, your podcast is evident of, and as you sit down with these guests who have lost people, who have gone through some of the hardest things that people have gone through, like, we can't discount the fact that life is hard. Being human is hard. Emotions are hard, especially when you don't have, like what you said, community, when you don't have a support system, when you feel like that support system has slighted you, or like all of these things. And I have found in my life that the friends that I feel gravitated towards, like in your case, to just kind of speak to, is never the person I would choose. I will just be honest. Like, they're just, and it's not against you, Pauline. I love you to death. And I'm so grateful that we're friends now. But it's that calling. Like, if you would have asked me when I walked into the newsroom, like, everybody here, Vanessa, who's the person that you are going to talk to when you leave here? I don't know how far down that list you would have been, but I don't think you would have been in the top like 3 or 5 initially in my human form, right? But that's the thing about the Lord.
Same.
Right. That's the thing about God, is that he says, but you know what? It's not about me. Like every time we'd sit down and talk and walk away, I can't tell you half of the things that I said, not because I didn't mean them or I wasn't trying to be intentional in my words with you, but because I would know like, oh, the Lord was really speaking to her, because I was just acting in obedience of like, okay, what do you want me to say here, Lord? And yeah, like there's Vanessa sprinkled in there for sure. My personality, my fun, my, my humor. But ultimately, I do feel like the Lord sends us in places, right? And for whatever reason, I didn't know your backstory. I knew nothing about you.
No.
I knew nothing you'd been through. I knew nothing like you'd experienced. And so it's not even like I could say like, oh, and I read up on you online and then here I came to like, no, I just listened.
And we knew nothing about
No.
each other, right? Like, because I didn't know your backstory. I just knew you
Right.
started. This was your first like news producing
Right.
job. That's
Yeah.
all I knew. And I was like, she's here and we've got her on the weekend.
Yeah, here I am. Yes. And so I just think it's very cool when the Lord works in anything. And it's not like every person I have ever talked to or spoken to about this topic has run to the Lord and been saved. Like there's people I spoke to in previous jobs or seasons or wherever who would just be like, no, thank you. I'm not interested. And I have no idea what happened in their life. I don't know if they ran off and like, whatever they did, but I just, again, acted in obedience to what I felt, which is exactly like what this season about stepping away from the news station is about, is going, okay, well, I know I don't belong here anymore, which was such a funny conversation. Can we just talk about like people's reaction, whether it was, and it's not just specific to my previous coworkers, like people in general, like when they're like, so what are you doing now? Or like, and when I'm like, well, I'm waiting. And they're like, what? You would quit without having a job? Like, why would you do that? What about your 401k? What about your, and they start asking all these questions that in my mind are just, oh, you're focused on my earthly needs. And not that those are not important, right? But I'm not focused on my earthly needs right now. Like I am focused on like what my calling is and what like the bigger purpose of Vanessa being here is. And that is just such an uncomfortable conversation for so many people. They're like, okay, that's great. Like, I remember one person telling me, it would be nice to be able to do something that I actually feel like I'm meant to do and I love, but that's just not the world we live in. Like, you need to find something that gives you a good amount of money and good benefits. That was the advice I was given. And I was just like, oh, okay. No, thank you. I'm good.
Did you have conversations with my family?
Right.
I'm sorry. I love you guys. I really do.
No, that was my family. So it's fine. No, it's true though. And like, I get it. I do. I understand. And the hard thing.
They mean well, right? And like, but there has to be more.
Well, and that's the thing is it's just, I think it's hard for people who don't have the same, like they're not in the same season. Think of it as literal seasons. If you're going through the coldest winter and someone is going through the hottest summer and they're trying to tell you like, oh, it's not that bad. Like go outside. It's fine. You're like, dude, I'm in a blizzard. Like I'm not going outside versus that's what it is I'm in a different season. So as much as you're telling me to go outside, I'm like, no, that doesn't sound safe. I'm in a blizzard. And so it's just respecting everybody's season. Like that's where you are, this is where I am, and just kind of following like what you feel is right for you. At the same time, kind of what we were just saying earlier, keeping an open mind. Like every conversation I have, I don't care if it's a barista. I don't know. I leave and go, Lord, whatever was meant for me from you, help me to remember and receive it. Whatever was not meant for me and is sent as a distraction, help me to forget it. And that is how I treat every conversation, because you never know who the Lord's going to use. This isn't about like, oh, who's a good Christian, who's a bad Christian. No, this is about like, I believe that whatever's meant for me will not pass. I think you taught me this. Whatever's meant for me will not pass. And whatever's not meant for me, I won't miss. I can't remember. You say it better than I do.
Pastor Benny talked about this weekend. It's kind of, it's already been written for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's already there. It's kind of what's meant for you won't miss you. which I have to be very honest, because we're in the business of honesty here. While I say that, I have to repeat that to myself very often in situations, especially when I start to lose hope or I'm breaking my own heart in a situation where my heart needs a little bit more time to catch up to what my brain already
Yes.
That letting go, that being still moment. My season right now is patience. And I don't have a lot of patience. I don't know patience. I know things in the now. Things happen at the blink of an eye and things happen at the snap of your fingers in news. Entrepreneurship and this new stage in my life, nothing happens that quickly like it happens in news. You know, I don't think news even happens as quickly as news happens.
No. And you know what? Like, okay, so I have a great visual for this. The Lord just showed me this week because I've been spending all my time at the park. It's been great. I'm not a park girl, but now I am. I'm like, excuse me, I need to spend time with the grass.
Great place.
And so I know I was like, Lord,
so you sit in it and touch the grass?
But just for a little bit.
I lay down in it and then I'm like, Lord, talk to me.
I just like,
I can't do life anymore.
Honestly, I'm like, look, I'm not, it's a beautiful place to be. And okay, so I was observing the sunset the other day and I was joking with the Lord and I was like, Lord, like, okay, you could do anything here. Like if I was in charge of sunsets and sunrises, I would just pop that sucker right up and I'd pop that sucker right down like a light switch. I'd be like, oh, it's day. Oh, it's night. Like that's what I would do. And I was watching, I was like, this is such an intentional thing. Like sunsets and sunrises are slow and they're intentional. And as I was sitting and staring at it, I was like, oh my gosh, like look at how much more beautiful this is than if it just was on and off. And I think that is a lesson for people waiting and in patience, because it's like, okay, but if the Lord just instantaneously granted you what you wanted, as much as that would be nice, where's the beauty in that? Where, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's just so much, nobody would run to record and shoot, and people take videos and photos of the sunset and the sunrise, like, constantly. There's whole pages dedicated to that. No one would do that if the sun just on and off, you know? And so that's what I try to remember. But I'm with you, and I don't like being patient. I mean, I'm the girl that orders at the drive-thru, and if there's more than one car, I'm out. Like, I can't. I can't be here. Goodbye.
I think my time in news, because it did teach me so much about just how to pivot, how to learn really quickly, how to problem solve on the fly. That laid a great foundation for you, I think, for what you want to do next. Let's go back to what that job listing was when you had walked in.
I do feel like the Lord there's just been little subtle things along the path where I can feel his encouragement, like, keep going, like breadcrumbs almost, where he's like, nope, you're right. You're hearing me right. Keep going. Because the amount of self-doubt, whether you're a believer or a non-believer, when you make a life-altering decision, the amount of self-doubt is astronomically higher than the amount of confidence, because it's change, it's new, and it's different. So let's take like getting out of a relationship, whether you're going through a divorce or you're changing a job or you're moving to a new place, like your comfort zone kicks in and you're like, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I don't need to leave my partner. Maybe we can make it work. Maybe I don't need to move. Maybe the noise the neighbors make isn't like as terrible as it is in my head. Let's just take a second to normalize that, like, those are normal patterns. But again, like for me, it's like, okay, Lord, like, was I hearing you right? Because what I thought was going to happen was I quit my job. I applied for this job that I found that I'll talk about in a second. And then they call me and they're like, oh my gosh, you've been who we've been waiting for. And then I go in and I train and I start, and I'm like sitting there like, this was all the Lord.
You had your whole life planned out.
Yeah, I was like, this is how it's going to go. And then everyone's going to be like, oh my gosh, she trusted the Lord. And it's going to be a great story. Because that's, you know, kind of what we've been talking about here. Like, people who work in news, like, it's all about the story. Like, is it a good story? So I'm like, Lord, nobody would watch this story. Like, if I was a reality show, people are disinterested now. The way the story goes is that I was sitting in church when I felt the Lord telling me incarceration. And then probably about a week later, went back to church. And you ever like met up with a friend and they're like, hey, you tell them like, oh, I'm like working on my house, or, you know, I got a new dog, or I'm working out now. And then you see them again and they're like, oh, how are your house renovations going? Or how's your new puppy? Right. That's what it felt
Yeah.
like, where the Lord's like, oh, how's incarceration going? The hunt. And I was like, oh, you meant that. Like, you really want me to like go do something there. Okay. And this isn't the first time I felt that on my heart. So I was like, all right, let me go look, like nonprofits, volunteer, da 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 da. That's when I felt the Clark County Detention Center thing. So I was going out of town. I was like, all right, Lord, when I get back, I will go to the Clark County Detention Center. We'll see what happens. And then I went on my trip and I came back, and that's when I went to the Clark County Detention Center. And in all that time, I have, of course, gone online because I was like, well, maybe there's something I can apply for online. And of course, it's all like not like it's corrections officers. It's like dispatch. I'm like, yeah, no. So when I had walked in there and they directed me to basically online, I was discouraged, right? Doubt. Like, oh, I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was expecting a party and confetti and like my name to be in lights, like that's the story. No, it was just, she was nice. So she's like, yeah, you can look online. And I was like, oh, okay. But then I pull up this QR code that takes me to a different website than the one that the general public has access to. And I'm scrolling through the pages. And at the very end is a part-time religious service worker position. And I about like leapt out of my body because I was like, this is it. This is the moment of the story. And I think like I texted you, I had texted some close girlfriends of mine from the church and like my family and was like, look, like the Lord's doing something. And then I quit my job. Like I was like, you know what? Yes, this is confirmation. We're good. And they told me no in the nicest of ways. Like a couple weeks later, they were like, no, you're not qualified. And I was like, oh, okay. That's not the plot twist I was expecting. But
Jesus calls the unqualified.
right. I was like, okay. But then that's the thing. I'm like, if I was so right about what you're saying, Lord, and trust me, I've had this conversation with the Lord many times, especially over the last 6 to 8 weeks, where I'm like, are you joking? Are you serious? Like, really? Because now it's been like, I found another position at a different like prison incarceration nonprofit, and that's a no. And then I found another position, and I'm just like, are you really serious? And so I would feel like if I'm hearing this story, you're like, okay, so you were wrong. But here's the crazy part, right? I don't feel wrong. Like I still have peace with the decisions I've made. And there have been other things. Because, okay, from the time I actually walked out the door from the news station, which was on a Friday at midnight, from the time I walked out Friday to the following Tuesday, I had been put in contact one way or another with the CEO of Hope for Prisoners, which is a nonprofit here locally in Las Vegas, the CEO of God Behind Bars, which is a nonprofit also with a branch here in Las Vegas. I had met a chaplain for the women's detention center that I'm now on part of the team to go in and pray for prisoners. And I had done an interview to become a justice ambassador for another nonprofit called Prison Fellowship, which is not locally based. And I'm up for a potential role there as well. And so as you and I were driving back that Tuesday, I had seen you, and I'm telling you this, it's like the Lord screaming at me, like it's been 4 days, Vanessa, and I've given you 4 different opportunities. And yet I'm like, but it's not the one I thought. What about the religious service worker position? And I just think that that's very telling.
The tears.
Yes.
The despair. but my plans.
But yeah, that's what and it's just trusting that, okay, what he has for me is better than what I can imagine for myself. It is extremely challenging though, because you only know what you know. Like I can only see what I can see. Yeah. I remember one time hearing in a sermon that like the way we view our life, like goals and aspirations versus how God sees our goals and like our life is kind of like a child. If a child who was like in a mother's womb never wanted to leave because it was so comfortable in the womb and didn't realize like, okay, but if you leave the womb, not only can you grow, not only do you have like a whole world, you learn to talk, you learn to walk, you learn like there's freedom, there's outside. Like imagine just wanting to stay like attached to an umbilical cord in a ball your whole life. Like that would not, like we look at that and go, that's silly.
We do stay stuck to that umbilical
Yes.
cord, right? We stay stuck in that comfort zone. We stay stuck in that job that kills us. We stay
Right.
like stuck in that relationship that kills us. We stay stuck in, anything that you attach yourself to that's keeping you stuck where you are not growing
Right.
anymore. It's that umbilical cord. It's that not stepping out into the
Yeah,
unknown.
that's so good.
Vanessa, I've had those same conversations with God, right? Where I'm like, I started my own business. I have my podcast. I'm sitting down with sponsors. I'm sitting down with people. I mean, I'm marketing the heck out of myself here. Like I am doing more things than I've ever done out of my comfort zone. And it's hard. And you've been there for the tears. You've been there for the days where, you talk about wanting to go back to that umbilical cord. I want to go back to that umbilical cord some days where I'm like, but it's the hell I know.
Right.
It's kind of like going back to that abusive relationship because it's what you know. It's you can anticipate what you know versus I can't plan for what I don't know. And that's where faith comes in, right? That's where patience comes in. And that's where, again, I had to really lean into something that was bigger than myself because, boy, these thoughts some days.
Well, no, and it's,
I go crazy.
But that's, I'm so proud of you for continuing to speak to that in whatever season people are going through, because like, okay, just take Instagram, for example. Like there was a part of me I was like, oh, I'm not going to announce that I'm leaving my job until I know my new job so that I can tell people like, oh, I left this, but it's for that. And it's that bookend, like, okay, and then people will like that and it makes sense. Right. And then I'm sitting here on my last day and I'm like, okay, I don't have a new job, but like I have to tell people I'm not at this job, not out of like obligation to humans, but like for networking. Right. And so I remember sitting there, it was literally like 4 a.m. I'm like, Devin, what do I post? And he said, post the truth. Devin's my boyfriend.
Thank you for clarifying.
So I was like, oh, yeah. Everyone's like, who's Devin? Is he like an angel for the Lord? Kind of. He's my boyfriend. So
he truly is an angel. He picks me up on Sunday morning so that I can get to church. You guys
are just the best.
We're like a little posse. It's fantastic.
We are. We're like
Jesus
a whole
said, you don't have a car? I will get
you
to church anyway, sweetheart.
Yes. No reasons. No man left behind. So I just, and it's a simple thing and you're thinking, okay, well, yeah, duh, post the truth. But like, that's really vulnerable. Like, not that I necessarily care how people perceive it. And I'm sure some people saw my post and were like, oh, there she goes again. Vanessa's like wildin'. And it's not so much that I care about that, but it's like, am I ready for those conversations? Am I ready for those like DMs? Am I ready for those like, fully transparent moments? And so I did. I mean, I posted what I posted and just said I'm leaving and I'm headed into a new season and the Lord told me to leave. And I mean, everyone's response was great because it's social media. But it was just, again, a reminder of like the Lord telling me, like, I realize how much when I'm talking to the Lord, I say me, Lord, I'm trying this. I'm doing this. I was obedient. I. And I just feel like he looks at me like a dad and he's like, okay, now let's take that back and let's take you out of it. And I'm like, what? And he's like, what am I doing? Like, you're supposed to trust me. I'm doing it. You gave it to me. And I'm like, right. Which is so much easier for me to tell other people. Like, I sit here and I blow up your phone with encouragement. And when you tell me like, Vanessa, I'm unsure, I'm like, don't be unsure. You're going. Like, you got this. Like, I know for a fact that this show one day will be in a streaming service and people will absorb it in their living rooms. And it's going to be an amazing experience because you are doing something that you are called to do. I can say that for you with certainty. If someone was like, okay, how much money do you want to bet that Paulina's show is going to make it to streaming service? Take it all. I'm not doubting it at all. But when it comes to me, I'm like, okay, wait, maybe like $1, maybe like 50 cents, which is why we need community, right? Because the belief I have in you is easier for me because I'm not emotionally involved versus the belief you have in me is going to be easier for you because it's not as risky and, not as emotionally involved. So it's important for us to have those people in our corners who can speak to your dreams, speak to your aspirations, speak to your life change. If you're leaving something hard, if you're leaving a relationship, if you're leaving a hard work environment, like having people around you who will go, like I've had friends, sisters, hey, I'm really proud of you. Like, I'm really proud of you for stepping away from something that wasn't healthy for you. I'm really proud of you for just doing what's best for you. And I'm like, thank you. Here's my Venmo. Just kidding. But really having that support is so vital. So vital.
My circle is very small, right? And I like my circle small. So I have a very hard time with community because I think we had a conversation recently where you were saying that on your last day of news, everyone was asking you, where are you
Right.
going next? In news, it's a very like common thing that we just kind of get up
Yeah.
and go, right? And so I'm very much like pack up your bags like you, and I'm a risk
Yeah.
taker. I go, 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 go. You were like, no, I'm here. I'm staying here. So that's like very new to people. When I think of like now being out of news, I need a community. I'm not used to needing a community.
I do find that very interesting. Like as someone, so I'm an anomaly. I worked in a news station in the market where I was born and raised. I don't think that happens very often outside of like your starting market in like 100 or 200 or whatever. And so when I was quitting, people were like, "Oh, well, where are you off to next, right? Or what city are you headed to?" And I was like, "What? Or are you staying in Las Vegas?" I was like, "Why would I go anywhere else? Like this is my home." But realizing how many people are transplanted, how many people, this is the only quote unquote family they have. This is all they know. So someone like yourself who gets kicked out of it, you're kind of just like the family member that can't come to Thanksgiving anymore. And so it's like, okay, well, like, has anyone checked on her? Like, is she okay? Like, is she doing well? And it's not, again, a knock at like the news industry, but I think like I've realized how lucky I am to be rooted in the same place. And if you're someone listening to this, you're like, well, I'm not from a big city like Vegas. I'm from a small town. It doesn't matter where you are, where you're rooted. Like that familiarity to people it is reviving. It is refreshing. And that's how we get rid of anxious attachment. That's how we get rid of like any kind of people feeling like, oh gosh, like everyone's just going to reject me and leave me and I'm alone in this world. I mean, it's a slippery slope because, you got to make sure those people can also walk and fly on their own, but just continuing to be like, hey, like I'm right here. Like I think I sent you this one night when, you were going through something with your self-doubt, which I love. I'm like, oh, there she is. Nope, we're not owning that. It's like when a dad is teaching you how to ride a bike and you get on the bike and you're like, at first, like your dad, and I'm saying this from like movies. My dad didn't do this. So if you're like, oh, that must be nice. No, I didn't get it either. So dad, hand on the back, right? And they like push you on the bike and they're with you. And then after a while, you do it so many times. Then what happens? They take their hand off the back and they let you go, but they're still standing there and they're still watching you. And then when you fall, because you're going to fall, and you start screaming, you turn around and there's dad. And he's like, you got this. You can do it again. And you do it again and again. And then eventually you go out riding your bike and your dad's not standing there. That's the equivalent of what I feel community is supposed to be. Like you stand there and you go, okay, right now I got your hand. You're going through a low place. You're going through a hard time. Okay, I got you. Okay, now you're getting a little bit stronger. You got this. You've been through this, Paulina. We know what this is. We know what this feels like. You got this. And then all of a sudden you turn around and like maybe me or whoever is not standing right there, but you feel the same confidence because we've been there, right? And I think it's important for people to know because as much as we say, like, I think our generation's really good at like, oh, well, I go to therapy and I get that feeling from therapy. Therapy's great. Love therapy. Going later today. But we can also we can be that for people. We joke about it, like you and I, like, oh, it was weekend therapy, but it's truly what it is to be there for people and to just have like an open, honestly, most people just want to be heard.
That's it.
We learned that in journalism, right? Mm-hmm. How many times did you sit down to interview someone and she's telling you her whole life story
from birth to end?
You're like, so tell me what happened here today. Well, I think it started in 1956 when I was born. And you're just like, oh my Lord, today, Dallas, today. Like not yesterday. I don't have time for this. I have a deadline.
I lean into the community that I know, right? And for me, you have been somebody who has spoken a lot of life into me. And I'm not used to having a community that speaks a lot of life into me because I'm used to having to do it alone. And I think a lot of us are used to having to do it alone. And especially if we're in these kind of industries that are isolating, there have been many lows and there have been many valleys that we've had to go through to get there, right? And you've been there. You've had to call me in community and be like, you can do this. You can keep going. And the lows get low and the highs get high. And without that community, we can't get through either, honestly. The highs or the lows.
Right. No, exactly. It's like a roller coaster, right? No one wants to go on a roller coaster that's just like, okay, we're starting here, we're going there. It's a straight line. It's like, oh, sign me up twice. No, You want the highs and the lows because the lows make the highs more exciting, and the highs, and I know that that's like stereotypical, and there's people out there who are like, listen, I didn't need to lose my loved one to feel great about finding love. I agree. I 1,000% agree. No one needs pain, suffering. Like we wouldn't be here talking about all these people you talk to in this podcast, wouldn't be here like advocating for moving forward and trying to take care of yourself if we didn't all agree that it sucks. But the reality of it is, like, it sucks, but what are you going to do about it? Like, that's the thing. Like, you can sit in your sorrow, you can sit in your pain. Everyone's pain's different. And when I think about, like, okay, Lord, why are you putting me in prison reform? Like, I don't have, like, just to keep it very honest and it's like very transparent, I've had a very cush life. I come from a middle class family. My dad is a Christian military man. Literally never stepped foot into a prison in my life, let alone known somebody. The closest is like a family member who got pulled over for a DUI. Like, that's the closest I've ever been to that world. I don't have any gang background, like nothing. So I'm like, okay, I've never even seen drugs, Lord. Like, what do you want me to say? You want me to sit in there and go, oh yeah, cocaine's hard. I don't know. Like, I don't know. But then I know I shouldn't joke about cocaine, but I don't know what it looks like. So it's fine.
Not you doing the news
I'm
and not knowing what cocaine is.
I don't. What is that? Oh man. Yeah, here we are. The Lord will make a way. So I'm sitting at home and I'm watching the new Moses documentary on Netflix, which I highly recommend. I love Moses. He's my favorite Bible character. Or not character. He really lived. Bible human. So when I'm watching this documentary about Moses, there was a pastor who said something that I was like, he said, people, as we study Hebrew, like history, Moses was born Hebrew, and then obviously went down the river, raised Egyptian, came back to deliver the Hebrews. And this pastor said, and a lot of people will wonder, like, well, why did the Lord do that? Why didn't you just like let him stay in the Hebrew, like, raise up and then deliver the Hebrews? And he said, because he had to be raised in a different environment because the Hebrews had a victim slavery mentality. None of them thought that they could ever be free because they were so used to being in bondage for generations. So the Lord needed someone from their world to go and live a life of freedom, to come back and say, you guys, there's something better. Like, you can be free. I've done it. I've lived as a free Hebrew man. And that was the belief that started catching on, where they all started going, you know what? Maybe we can be different than our ancestors. Maybe I don't have to live in bondage. Maybe I don't have to live in slavery. And that just like turned all these light bulbs off in my head. And I was like, oh, that's why you're sending me, because I can look across the table at a criminal and say, you're not this. You don't have to continue to be this. Granted, I don't know every single story, but it doesn't matter. The Lord doesn't see you like this. You can be different. You can break a generational curse. You can step out and be the one who doesn't get involved in gangs, or et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what makes me excited about it, is I'm like, yeah, I don't know what it's like to grow up like you did, but I do know what it's like to live in freedom away from who the world says you are. I just think you never know like what is going to come from the calling that you feel, and you never know what can be birthed. This is stuff I'm learning like now in these 6 to 8 weeks as I reflect. It's like, oh, okay, got it. Oh, okay. Okay.
That reflection, though, Vanessa, is really where you find yourself. And I think that, kind of reflecting back, whether it's walking, sitting in grass, right, or laying grass, talking to God, talking to the universe, whatever. Again, like, we're talking about God because that's what we feel comfortable with, but no judgments here, honestly,
Sure.
Whatever your denomination is. It's really just having those moments to reflect on yourself and say, here's where I'm at. And what do we do? Like, what needs to move forward with you and what needs to be let go of? Thing that you learn here, and then how do you move forward? Again, I go back to faith. That takes some kind of faith, whether it's in God or the universe or whatever you want to call it. Like, that takes some kind of faith to say, I will keep walking. I don't know what I'm walking into, but I'm going to keep walking.
Yeah. And I 1,000% agree with that. And I, echoing what you say, like, there is no judgment. And I think that's one of the common misconceptions about, I know that there's bad Christians out there. They just are. I like to tell people, it's like You ever have that family member that you're like, we don't claim them? That is not my cousin. I don't know how they got here. Yeah. Those are the Christians you're talking about. We don't claim them. I would say, like, whatever your life path is, wherever you feel like you are, for me, once I started to really learn who the Lord was directly, who Jesus Christ was directly, not from church, not from other Christians, not from my parents, but like really learn who he was directly, is when I started to really realize, like, oh, wow, like this can be different. My life can be different. I can be different. It's been a wild ride. It's had its ups and its downs. I've had my tears and I've had my laughs. I've had my heartbreak and I've had my encouragements. And it's not cushy and fluffy and fun, but knowing that I have someone in my corner always, even if all my friends stop talking to me tomorrow, I still have someone in my corner. Like, it was really hard to put my notice in at work and face everybody. Like, I remember the day the email came out and I was like having anxiety attack heading to work. So I'm like, everyone's going to ask me what I'm doing and why. And it wasn't even like they were aggressive. It's the inner, like, I remember leaving work that day and feeling exhausted because I feel this like urgency to defend myself. I think by the last person who came over to me was like, so I heard the news, where are you going? And I was like, I don't know yet. The Lord's directing my steps. Thank you. And just like walked away because I was so exhausted. I'm so sorry to that person. But it's just, you just don't have to. Like, you don't. And that's what we talk about, like, on my podcast about not having kids. You don't have to defend your choice. You don't owe anybody any explanations ever. But you do need to know in your heart that you're doing the thing that you feel A, called to do, and B, like, that you is going to make not just you happy, but make the best, like, ripple effect. The best ripple effect. You're not, and everyone's called to, stand up on stage, or not everybody's called to be on a podcast, but everywhere you are, you can serve. Whether that's you're a barista or you're a doorman or you're a flight attendant or, you're a firefighter, like, everywhere you are, you touch other humans, and that's a ripple effect. So what's going to make you a happier person so you can send that ripple effect, like me to you to this podcast, the podcast to the people, like, it's just a whole big ocean.
Thanks for watching, and that's okay. Join us next week on Wednesday for another episode. In the meantime, subscribe below, like, comment, and share, or find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until next week.